Good morning, John Michael Greer.
Good morning.
This is Piero Giorgio, author of Survive the Economic Collapse, and today I'm very, very happy to have you on my blog for my interview. You are the author of very many books. The list is too long to mention, but certainly The Long Descent has been the first book that I've read of yours and that influenced very, very much my work. And I'm very grateful. First of all, I need to thank you for that book and all the others that I've read. And I'm very grateful that of all your work. And my friend James Kunstler thinks that you're one of the best writers in today's United States. Your books are covering so many fields and so many disciplines. Today we'll talk about your latest ones. But first of all, how you seem to publish about 3 to 5 books every year. How do you find the time?
I do 2 to 3 books a year, actually. There have been a couple of years where there's been more of that, but that's because there's been some projects hung over. I know writers who have trouble writing, who sweat bullets when they're writing, who just have to wrestle every word out. I don't. I write as fast as I talk, and I often talk rather fast. Writing is very easy for me, and it's the one profession I've ever tried that I actually enjoyed, so I feel kind of committed to it. But the other secret is that all of my blog posts, not all of them, but most of my blog posts end up being raw material for books. So I post, I have a weekly post on my blog, The Archdruid Report, and usually 2/3 to 3/4 of that post end up becoming first draft material for my next peak oil book. So I don't believe in wasting prose, and just
Excellent. In fact, what we see from since at least The Long Descent and the books that you write on peak oil, on Apocalypse Not, on the trying to dispel this nonsense about apocalypse and the rapture and the Maya prophecies, all the way to the After Oil series of books and to your latest one, which is After Progress. We see this is a family of books. It's clearly there's a thought process that we can see advancing from book to book, but clearly your ideas about the end of progress have been around for. Well, you've had these ideas for quite some time, right?
Oh yeah. The thing to remember here is that I got into things like the limits to growth and the approaching end of the petroleum age and so on back when it was originally fashionable in the 1970s. I was a kid underfoot in the appropriate text scene, and unlike so many people, when the Reagan-Thatcher era came around and so many people said, oh, that's all over with, we're going to concentrate on getting rich and who cares about the planet, I somehow, I don't know, I didn't get the memo or something. I didn't, get rid of part of my brain or whatever was necessary to, when the last of the hippies became the first of the yuppies. I stayed with that, and I continued to research it and develop my ideas and do a lot of reading in a range of subjects back when you literally couldn't talk about the subject without being shouted down if people just didn't turn their backs and walk away. And so when it became possible to talk about this sort of thing again in the first years of the new millennium, when I started up my blog, I had quite a backlog of things to talk about. I'm still working through what essentially is one set of ideas having to do with this whole mythology of progress that we've allowed to dominate our ideas about the future. The problems, the lethal problems with trying infinite growth on a finite planet, and so on and so on. It's all part of a single set of ideas, but it's going to take rather a number of books to finish developing those ideas and getting them out there.
Indeed, in your latest book, After Progress, and I must say you managed the feat to quote both Nietzsche and Lovecraft, two of my favorite authors, almost in the same paragraph, and actually reconciling me with Oswald Spengler. But you tackled the religion of progress. How did you come up with that concept of religion of progress?
It was almost impossible to miss. I would once you you realize that, once you step outside it, once you realize that limitless growth on a finite planet is a recipe for disaster, and you try to talk to people about this, okay, there can't be limitless oil on the planet. We've all seen pictures of the Earth from space. There's no pipeline from Neptune coming in to refill the oil we're pumping in. You run into exactly the same 1,000-mile stare, the same thought stoppers and blank looks you get if you talk to somebody from some fundamentalist religious sect about the logical problems in their beliefs. And years and years ago, I said, hold it, it's as though they believe in progress as a religion, as a god. And the more I explored that idea, the more it made sense of the whole thing. Once I encountered the idea of civil religion in the sociological literature, it made perfect sense. Civil religion is what you have when people want to believe in a religion but no longer feel able to believe in, say, a god or what have you. People will come up with civil religions to replace it, and nationalism was, for many people in the 18th and 19th century, that was a very powerful civil religion. Marxism, there's a lot of people who treated Marx,
Yes.
the Marxist thing as a religious belief. I mean, Marx made some real contributions to political economy, no question. But there's also this civil religion that built up around the glorious victory, the proletariat is right around the corner, etc. We saw how that ended up.
You make a good point with was it Engels that was put his Protestant background and into almost recognizable Protestant faith into Marxism.
Yeah. I mean, if you take the basic sort of map of history in evangelical Protestant Christianity, and you can map it point for point onto Engels' version of the economic history of the world. Primitive communism is Eden, the discovery of property, the development of property, that's the fall. And so on, you go through the dispensations of sacred history. Marx then becomes the Jesus. The First International are the apostles. The Revolution, that's the second coming. Socialism is the millennium, and finally, the New Jerusalem of communism descends from the heavens, and we're all happy forever. Point for point, it's the same thing. And the reason that caught on is precisely because it fills the same emotional needs that the Christian faith fills for people who no longer believe in Christ. Progress is exactly the same way. Progress is the God who is leading us upward and onward toward the New Jerusalem in outer space. And people believe in it blindly. They believe in it mindlessly. If you suggest to them that, actually no, progress was a temporary economic condition brought on by the fact that we ripped off the Earth's fossil carbon reserves, and it began around 1800 and it's going to end in your lifetime. It's like trying to explain to a medieval peasant that, God and his saints and angels are no longer up there in heaven. They won't hear it. They can't hear it.
Yes.
And again, it's a religion.
When religions take such a big space in today's world, we do have a collision between them. Today we see the religion of progress being almost living together with other more older religion like Islam, like and like, as you said, evangelical Protestantism, which some of them are very vibrant and others are much more on a slowdown, like maybe Catholicism. How can real religious religion reconcile itself living in the same world in the religion of progress?
Well, there are two ways that tends to happen. On the one hand, and you'll see this in a lot of the established religions, the large, well-to-do, comfortable religious faiths that have the big buildings and the small congregations these days, they basically sold out to the religion of progress. I don't know how things are in your end of the world, but here in America, if you go into the sort of mainstream, comfortable Protestant church of a Sunday, the sermon you'll hear will probably have more to do with the religion of progress than it will have to do with the religion of Jesus. People will be talking about social progress, about how we need to bring social justice to these people, and it's all done in the sense of this: we're advancing onwards and upwards toward a better world. Now,
I agree.
I don't claim to be any kind of Bible scholar, but that's not what the Bible says, and that's not what historical Christianity says. So you get a lot of religions who have simply sold out to the religion of progress. And then on the other hand, and again, I don't know how things are on your side of the Atlantic, but over here you also have people who are reacting against the religion of progress. We have our fundamentalists who are completely convinced the world is going to pot. The Antichrist is hanging around, ready to step on stage. The four horsemen of the apocalypse, they're busy, saddling up right now. The end of the world is going to come sometime really, really soon.
Yes.
And that's their way to avoid the religion of progress. So, yeah.
So it's a sort of anti-religion, as you describe in your book, the fight for creationism, which was something that would have been considered very odd a few centuries ago, and yet today that battle, which is a losing battle for Christians, for example, seems to be fought with incredible energy.
I think. Yeah, the Catholic Church has been very smart about this, and in fact, a number of other religious bodies have as well. They said, look, this is not an issue.
Yes.
The Bible is about the Rock of Ages, not the Age of Rocks deal. But especially in America, for all I know, there's lots of them in Europe as well. You get these people who are convinced that they have to disprove evolution or their religion falls down, which is silly. It's and I argued in my book that they've basically been lured into a sucker's game.
Yes,
that
I agree.
Actually supports the religion of progress, because the religion of progress, you've got to have, the notional other side, the people who because the heroic forces of progress have to triumph over something, right?
Yes.
And if nobody present themselves, they have to be arranged for. And so we've got the fundamentalist, the evangelical Christians who are busy denouncing Darwin, and we have, a lot of environmentalists have let themselves get sucked into that one. Here, let's find another losing battle to fight for the greater glory of progress.
I agree, and to be fair, in Europe we have a little bit less of that, because probably the religion of progress develops much easier in a more atheistic environment, which is more widespread, I must say, in my part of the world. However, we do see, because society seems to be, the progress is reaching their limits, as you describe also in your book. People find themselves into hollow lives, because no matter how many cars and iPhones and televisions you put in your life, eventually it's just a consumer habit, and it's not something that fulfills you with meaning or with destiny. Whereas and that shows the same signs of collapse of those belief systems, such as it's very similar to the collapses of the Soviet Union, when no one could believe that it was the workers' paradise.
In many ways, the religion of progress it's narrowed down. It's really narrowed down in recent years. 100 years ago, when people talked about progress, they had a very wide range of changes in mind. Yes. Things were supposed to get better socially. More people, there was going to be less poverty. There was going to be more opportunity for all. Things were supposed to advance intellectually. Things were supposed to advance culturally. And year after year, it's kind of narrowed down until now. When people talk about progress, what they mean is new electronic toys.
Yes.
And new electronic toys just don't cut it when you're looking for a purpose or a meaning for life. And I think one of the reasons, you had all these European people running off to join, Daesh in Syria and things like that, is that people are desperate for meaning. They'll take it even from the worst possible source.
Absolutely. And it's just a process it's just the beginning of a process where soon you will have the counter ISIS with the same violence and savagery coming up, whether it's going to be in Israel or in secular Europe or in religious people, non-Islamic religious people. It's inevitable that we go to these fighting sooner or later. Violence begets violence. It's just the human way of responding to threats. Now,
And there's one other point here is that young men especially, young men have been adapted for literally millions of years of evolution to fight things. Their role in tribal societies is to, be out there on the edges defending the community against threats. And so a society that expects its young men to kind of plod along calmly, doing nothing in particular, is going to be very vulnerable to anybody who says, come fight for us. And so that's one of the things we're getting. Our ideas of progress don't leave room for the fact that people at different genders, different stages of their lives have actual hardwired needs that the consumer society can't meet. But go on.
No, I'm myself born just after the first man on the moon. Since then, that balloon of successful, if not so far, but certainly successful feat of technology has not been repeated in such a glorious way, and yet a lot of children of probably your generation, and even more your generation than my generation, have been fed when they were kids with this science fiction ideas, which you try to explain as a sort of gospel.
Yeah. In the United States, anytime there's a problem, you'll hear people saying, "Well, if we can put a man on the moon, how come we can't fix this?" That's the touchstone for this fantasy of omnipotence. Yeah, we got some people on the moon. At this point, everybody who's ever been on the moon is a very old man.
Yes.
We're not that many years from the point where nobody living will have ever set foot on another world. And despite all the yelling and there's been some cool satellite stuff going, but nobody's seriously talking about going back. And one of the things that I've argued, in fact, in my blog and elsewhere, is that we're seeing the end of the age of space.
Yes.
Began with what began with Sputnik, with the first Sputnik, will wind down possibly in our times. We may, some of us who are living now may see the last satellite go up.
In one of your excellent novels, Stars Reach, recently published, there's really two themes. One is, of course, how people live in a few centuries from now. But another theme, which we can see a link within After Progress, is this idea that reaching the stars or interstellar travel, and indeed one day managing to do what all this science fiction literature and movies have promised us in the past, is a pipe dream and an impossible feat. Is this something I should be depressed about?
No. It's like getting all bent out of shape because you can't walk on water. Okay. The thing is, the stars. We're going to go to the stars. Take that apart, and again, you've got heaven. It's an attempt to project religious ideas onto the secular universe. It doesn't do that well. There are very good reasons to believe that no intelligent species has ever or will ever be able to leave its own solar system. That's something I've discussed in several of my books, and it's also something that's discussed in the novel Stars Reach. Actually, there's a thing called Fermi's Paradox.
Yes.
Which has had a lot of sort of round discussion. It's not a paradox at all. It's a logical disproof of the possibility of infinite progress. We've got the Milky Way galaxy has, I forget how many 100 billion stars in it, and it's been around for 15 billion years or so. And in that time, if intelligent life shows up at all commonly, and perpetual progress is possible, there should be evidence of intelligent species scattered across the stars. We should be able to look through our telescopes, through our radio telescopes, and say, that's not a natural phenomenon. There's got to be, intelligent life out there. We don't see any of it.
Yeah, where is everybody?
Where is everybody? And in fact, the books on the subject all avoid the logical. It's amazing how they wiggle out of addressing the logical conclusion, which is the perpetual progress isn't an option. That presumably, a certain number of intelligent species evolve. A certain number of those find the available energy and resource supplies on their planet, and they burn through those, and they settle down to a lower level of technology. That makes perfect sense. The idea that there's some kind of escape clause that would enable us to, zoom off to the stars, I don't buy it. I really don't. Given what it took to put human footprints on the moon, and the moon is so close.
Yes, very close.
By space standards. It took the incredible investment of energy and resources and fossil fuels that it took to make that happen. It's totally plausible to me. I mean, doubtless out there, among the stars, there are other intelligent species who have maybe visited, a neighboring planet or something like that. But going to the stars, please. One thing that I actually consider a hopeful sign is that the people that we had here in the United States the annual WorldCon, the World Science Fiction Convention.
Yes,
it was over in the western part of the country, and I think they had to have the. I'm not sure if they actually had to wear filter masks, but that whole area is full of smoke because, as you probably know, much of the western United States is on fire right now.
Yes.
But all of the news coverage from within the science fiction community mentioned the people at the convention are mostly middle-aged and older. You don't see many young people there. It's getting very gray. And I think what's happening is that a lot of younger people are looking at the spaceships and the interstellar this and all the, the religious trappings of the faith of progress and going, that's hokey. We're not going there. That's not a future we're ever going to see. I'm not interested.
Mm-hmm.
So my hope is that this shows that people are starting to get more of a clue and are looking for other options. But go on.
So the logical consequence is that eventually, as all species disappear because of either entropy or natural disaster or meteorite, eventually we're doomed in this planet. We're doomed to end up in this planet.
Well, every single person who's listening to this is going to die. Okay?
For sure.
Human beings die. Species die.
Yes.
Planets die. Nobody has has a promise of immortality. And that's one of the other ways in which you can tell the religion of progress is a religion, because it claims to offer immortality.
Yes.
It claims, no, we can get off this planet, we can zoom through heaven, the stars, or what have you. Yeah, the thing is, when you think about the number of things our species has done in the last 5,000 years, just since the beginning of recorded history, there's an immense richness there.
Yes.
Let's say we last for I think the average genus, mammalian genus, lasts for 10 million years. That's very rough. But let's assume that the genus Homo lasts that long, and we go through 10 million years, 5,000 years multiplied by all that additional.
Yes.
Think of the incredible richness of that. It's not necessary to fantasize about immortality and eternity. Maybe we can buckle down to do something useful while we're here. In the same way, coming to terms with the fact that each of us has to come to terms with the fact that we're going to die. We're not going to live forever, and that's a major motivating factor in how we're going to live our lives. I think our species needs to come to terms with the fact that it's not going to be around forever. We need to grow up, get rid of the adolescent fantasies that we're immortal, that nothing can hurt us, that we've got some marvelous destiny waiting for us in the stars, and become adult as a species. Stop acting like a bunch of drunken kids.
Good point. Now, there's been lots of rises of civilization and collapses, and probably much more than we know, because, as you said, recorded history only really goes 5,000 years in the past, and we really don't know what happened between, let's say, minus 60,000 and minus 12,000 BC. But today, there's something that is quite unique in our society. I can only see two things that makes it very unique. First of all is that it's extremely globalized. And the second thing is that we're 7.3 billion and going towards 10 billion. And probably these two elements have never been reached to that point. And Do you think?
As far as we know, yeah.
Yeah, as far as we know, and certainly these two factors makes it quite unique in its fragility in a way, or certainly in the exponential speed at which we are piling up the disasters are waiting to happen. How do you think collapse is going to, if any collapse, but I think we both believe that there's going to be some sort of collapse or long descent, as you called it. How is it going to happen in your opinion?
Okay, basically, what we have here is a major difference of scale. But a difference of scale is not necessarily a difference of kind. We talk about how we've got a globalized society. We've got 7.3 billion people in it. Okay, when transportation and communication were much slower, when the world was in effect much bigger, you had similar situations on a smaller scale. If all you've got to work with, let's say, if your world consists of the Yucatan Peninsula, as the world of the ancient Mayans did, and that world is about as crowded as it could get. You have as many people living in that area as practically as will fit, or more. And then you begin the process of decline and fall. It's going to follow the same trajectory as if you have 7.3 million people and your whole planet is as full as it's been. And now the Mayan example is particularly telling because you know what destroyed them? Climate change. They caused sufficient damage to their environment that the climate dried up, and they had catastrophic droughts. They had a range of other problems. They had agricultural failure caused by exhaustion of the fragile tropical soils. All of this should sound very familiar because we're doing this to the world right now. And so what happened was a long descent. It's actually the thing that originally gave me the concept. It took about 150 years of rolling collapse. Some city-states collapsed soon, some late. There were wars, there were epidemics, it was a complete mess for like a century and a half. Until finally you ended up with small villages of Mayans scattered in the jungle and a lot of abandoned cities. Now, what I'm arguing is that what we're facing is the same thing, different in scale, not different in kind. So, and just to sketch it out very roughly, imagine that over the next 150 years, we start seeing, as a result of the mess that we've made of the climate, the mess that we've made of the topsoil, you fill in the blanks. The population curve starts turning down as malnutrition, famine, epidemic disease, war, all these things start kicking in, and it's not everywhere at once. One decade, there's famine ravaging Africa. Another decade, European war. I think you'll see that, and so on. And one thing after another, and it gradually stumbles down the familiar slope into the next dark age. That's what I see coming, and the fact that we have a lot more people. I mean, to some extent, that just means there's a lot more die-off that has to happen, but it doesn't have to happen all at once.
You make a good point. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, go ahead.
No, actually, you make a very good point, which I made me think, because it's certainly something in my book that I conceive that I do conceive that collapses can be very fast, but certainly you made me think about first of all something that I acknowledge: collapses can be slow and yet be quite violent and tragic, despite them being fairly slow. After all, the 30 Years' War was a long war, but it was not pleasant.
The 30 Years' War would not have been better. It would not have been any worse if it had taken place in a single year.
No, exactly. And but at the same time, I was thinking, am I falling into the trap of the anti-religion of progress by thinking? Basically you make me challenge my own ideas. And ask myself if I'm not falling in the trap of the anti-religion of progress, and if I don't have some sort of biased ideas in that in thinking that collapse can be fast because of the supply chains being so fragile in today's world. But certainly yes, the slow collapse, or rather slow collapse, as you described in The Long Descent, or that Kunstler's described in his own books, or Chris Martenson or Orlov's, is clearly a possible scenario, right?
Well, the thing that I point out is that the slow collapse is not necessarily slow in any one place. Okay, if let's say 50 years from now, there's a catastrophic European war combined with famines and all the usual things that happen when you have a major war. Okay, for people who are caught in the middle of that, collapse may be very, very fast indeed. They go, over a period of a few years from being relatively comfortable to being dead, or starving refugees in a camp in some godforsaken corner of the planet. It's just that it's a rolling collapse. It happens in different places at different times. You mentioned supply chain issues. That's a major issue. We may well see some real problems with that in the month, or possibly the next year or so. With I'm sure all of our listeners are familiar with what's going on in the world stock markets right now.
Today,
it's been a colorful thing to watch.
Today we're August 24th. For those who
August 24th, yeah. And I don't know how things will close out. I know when I got up this morning, the Dow Jones Index, our major U.S. index, opened down 1,000 points, which is a little unnerving. But the thing is, supply chains fall to bits. Typically, what happens then is that people start scavenging around for other ways to get things they need. And do those other ways all work? No. But so what happens? What tends to happen in the event of a sudden shutdown is that you get these jerry-rigged temporary structures slammed into place to try to make something work. And those will hang on for a while, then they'll break down, and something else will be put in its place. If the global economy grinds to a halt because of a credit crunch, because the credit markets freeze up, and all the credit that people need the businesses need to manage their exchanges, if that goes away in a hurry, what you're going to see is governments primarily stepping into the void and using, if necessary, martial law to make sure that, say, food gets distributed to people. And so there are all of these things. These things have happened. If you look at other economic crises in the past, the powers that be are willing to step into the gap. The question is, okay, how much is lost in this jog down, and what's going to happen in the next one? And when this temporary fragile system falls apart, then another temporary fragile system is put into its place. How many people are going to fall through the gaps? So the takeaway point here, I think, is that a long descent is made up of a lot of quick collapses.
I see.
They're just not all. It's just not all everywhere. But if you're in the middle of one of those things, if you're there when the war breaks out, if you're there, and if you don't have enough money, if you don't have money to eat and can't get any for X period of time, for you, it's a fast collapse.
Absolutely, as it is right now for people leaving Syria or Libya, or in some parts of Ukraine, for example, among other places.
Among other places, yeah.
You actually wrote a very interesting, I think, novel with Twilight's Last Gleaming, where you gave an example, basically an illustrated example of how a country like the United States, a nation like the United States, can try to go to war in a mix of trying to secure resources or businesses' profits, and at the same time make war to exercise its problems. And eventually, as you described the Mayas, who eventually went into a path of war that lasted until they collapsed themselves, you described a scenario in that book where United States could overextend itself and get this psychological defeat that makes it significantly collapse in its ideology. Do you think we're near to some scenarios like that for the United States?
One of the reasons I wrote that book is that I think people massively underestimate how fragile the United States is. I don't think most people anywhere in the world realize, the United States struts around as the only superpower, this kind of stuff. It is incredibly fragile. We have the most expensive military in the world. An enormous number of our weapon systems are there to provide profit for big corporations. They don't actually work.
Mm-hmm.
The political climate in this country is like nothing since the years just before the outbreak of our Civil War. The amount of partisan hatred, the amount of just complete mutual incomprehension among the different factions. The U.S. is fragile. It's incredibly vulnerable, and what I had argued in one of my other books, Decline and Fall is the title, and the novel Twilight's Last Gleaming kind of came out of that as an attempt to use fiction to show to kind of get the point across. The United States is extremely vulnerable to the risk of military defeat, and we've never experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the U.S. has had to withdraw. We've had to say, okay, we're not going to win, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, but we've never actually been beaten.
Yes.
Crushed on the battlefield, forced to accept the other guy's, whatever terms the other guy wants to offer. That's never happened in the history of this country. If it ever does, I think the national nervous breakdown you're going to see is going to be one for the record books.
Oh, yes.
And I'm not at all sure that the United States as a nation would survive that experience. Thus the story.
I agree. It's a risk. Everyone I speak to in the military is scared of that, at least in the middle and lower ranks. Now, in After Progress, you mentioned quite a lot of religious systems. There is one that is not mentioned too much, which is Islam. What do you think of Islam, having been around for 14 centuries now? And is it in a position of strength in the collapse, or is it also, like others, in a position of weakness? What's your thought on Islam?
That's a complicated issue because, of course, Islam is not just one religion. There are the various sects. There are various like Christianity. It's not quite as fragmented as Christianity is, but I really don't know. It's not a religion that greatly interests me, and it's also a religion where, unfortunately, there's that significant fraction of people who are, if you talk about it in public and say something they consider uncomplimentary, they want to kill you. And so I don't generally discuss Islam. No, I mean,
on one hand, it's very wise.
If the Christian religion had a large number of homicidal whack jobs who thought that anybody who insulted Jesus should be, blown up or gunned down, I probably wouldn't talk about Christianity either.
Okay.
And when not that Islam has anything to worry about from whether or not I talk about it, but
that's for sure.
I see no point in discussing a religion if that can't keep its whack jobs in line.
Well, that's a survivalist attitude. Onto that, actually, I have a question which is probably linked to your other books on the green wizardry and on your Druid revival. How do you yourself and your family prepare to physically? I mean, intellectually, we understand that you have a great analysis of the process of what's happening right now. But how do you prepare yourself? How do you see what people should do to prepare themselves in the day-to-day lives and all that?
And that's a lot of what the book Green Wizardry is about.
Yes.
Basically, the thing to keep in mind, first of all, we cannot predict exactly what's going to happen in any given part of the world or at all. We know that we know that the system cannot sustain itself. We know that the industrial economy is on a collision course with the limits to growth. That's going to play out messily in the years, decades, and centuries ahead. Exactly how that will work out on a day-by-day basis, we don't know. Mm-hmm. What we can know is that anything that makes you less dependent on the industrial system increases your chance of survival. Because if that system folds out from underneath you, you need to have something in place. And so getting at least some control of your food supply. That means, if you have space to grow food in the back garden, that's what you need to do. At least learn how. Mm-hmm. Minimizing your energy usage. That's crucial because energy, the energy resources are going to be one of the major things that are going to fall out from under you. It's possible to get by on much less energy and many fewer resources than most people do nowadays. Now, admittedly, I'm talking here mostly to Americans who are among the most wasteful people on the planet. Our European listeners.
We're catching.
Yeah, but the thing is, what is it? The average European uses like a third the energy
of
the average American. And I've been trying to get Americans to just scale down to European standards as a good start. But yeah, basically minimize your dependence on the system, on all these overstrained, overburdened technosystems. If you don't have to rely on all these supply chains for the things you need to get by on a day-to-day basis, obviously you're going to be much less affected when they start coming unraveled. Finding a way to make a living that doesn't depend on the corporate economy, because I'm quite convinced a lot of corporate jobs are just going to go away. There's a huge number of people employed in the global economy these days who don't actually produce any goods or services that people actually want or need. They're serving, they're meeting some apparent need of the corporation. And so, if all you know how to do is like corporate image management or one of the other sort of office fauna jobs that so many people have these days, you need to have a real skill. You need to be able to produce goods or services that people, not businesses, but people actually want and need badly enough that they'll swap something you need for it. And so you've got developing some control over your own food supply. You've got minimizing your use of energy and other resources. You've got developing a way to make a living, or at least potentially to make a living, that isn't dependent on the corporate economy. And those are three general things. Not everyone is capable of doing them. There are other options for those that aren't. But will those guarantee you survival? Of course not. Nothing will. But there are all ways to minimize your vulnerability. And then, of course, you look around at the situation you're in. If you live in a big city close to sea level, you're going to have some very different needs than if you live, as I do, in a relatively small town in the middle of farmland, 700 feet above sea level. Mm-hmm. Well inland and away from big population centers. There will be a lot of people who live in small towns, who live in areas that have a lot of farmland where, local produce is readily available in the markets and things like that, who are actually going to come through this in fairly good shape, certainly through the next round of crises and whatever comes out of that. And I'd encourage people to try to be one of those people, to get themselves into a position where it's not like, you're trapped in New York City, the seas are rising, and there's no power.
You're in trouble then.
You're in trouble, exactly. Whereas here, the power goes out sometimes. It's not a problem for us.
Well, it's interesting that James Howard Kunstler lives in farmland country up north in the Hudson Valley. Dmitry Orlov lives on a boat and moves around places far away. Chris Martenson lives up away from Boston. I myself live in a farm and grow my own food as much as I can.
There you go.
And
the people I know who take this seriously are all doing that kind of thing.
Yes. I used to be international marketing manager. I have no hope to learn good skills with that.
Yeah, so now you've got a farm and you grow your own food. Hey, you're well placed. I put a lot of time into writing. That's actually has historically been a fairly good career, even in rough times. And so, but we've got the garden out back, and we also the town where I live is in the middle of we're in the north central Appalachians. There's lots of farms and lots around here, and the stores carry a lot of local produce. There are farm stands that I can walk to and bring back a couple of shopping bags full of fresh produce for remarkably little money. And so there's that kind of local attention to locality, to local dependency, to local resources is a very important part of making preparations. It's not about hiding in a bomb shelter in the hills. It's about
Completely agree.
being in a place where there's a reasonable chance of getting your essential needs met, even in rough times.
I couldn't agree more. And indeed, as if you've read my book, Survive the Economic Collapse, which is probably a European perspective on surviving, and I clearly don't advise people to go with the fear and going into live into bunkers and things that I believe are silly and really way too. Yeah, it makes no sense. And it's really not constructive. One of the elements I try to explain a lot in my book, and I've just received Green Wizardry a few days ago, so I'm going to read it, is to create the social bonds with the neighbors and the community within which one lives. Is that something that you see as fundamental?
Again, it's not advice that everyone can follow, but if you can, it's very important. Now, partly, there's the European perspective and the American perspective. Americans America has a large selection or a large tendency to produce loners. You always have people who are kind of living out on their own, and nobody cares much. And that's an option here. I have no idea how popular that would be on your end of
a bit less,
side of the Atlantic.
Less popular.
Yeah, but it's useful to have if you're the kind of person who can connect socially, if you're the kind of person who is comfortable with that, it's very important. And especially if you have something to offer to your neighbors.
Yes.
Something that the neighbors, that's the key always. If you can bring something to the interaction, then you can weave those kind of bonds that will keep people going. One advantage you have in Europe that we don't have in America is that Europe has been pounded by wars and depressions and more wars and still more wars.
Yes.
I'm sure there are people. In fact, I know there are people alive today in Europe who remember what it was like during and after the Second World War.
Oh yes.
And so people who remember what it's like to get by in really hard times. The problem we have in the United States is that the last war fought on our soil was the Civil War, and that ended in 1865.
Yes.
150 years ago. Now, you find people in the South who they have family. They have, their family memories and stories that have been told from parent to child for generations. But I don't think anybody in America really grasps just how harsh things can get. And I'm afraid we're going to find that out the hard way in the not-too-distant future. But in Europe, you've got that advantage. You can talk to elderly people. Say, okay, how did you get by? When the Germans occupied your country, how did you get by when there was no trade from overseas? How did you get by during the war? How did you get by during the Depression, during the hard years afterwards? People east of the former Iron Curtain, how did you get by in the difficult years when most of the wealth of the Eastern European nations being siphoned off to Russia? That's an immense body of practical knowledge. And I hope Europeans who are interested in this kind of thing are out there talking to their grandparents and so on and saying, okay, what tips would you offer somebody facing hard times? Because that kind of lived experience is worth its weight in gold.
It is, and this is very good advice for people who still have grandparents who have experienced that, or people who know people who used to be refugees away from ex-Yugoslavia, for example, that suffered war in the 1990s, which have very valuable insight on what happened. And even today, we are at the beginning of a complete swamping of refugees now from Africa and the Middle East, where we have about we're counting about 1.5 million just this year alone. And it's only going to increase. And these people have suffered very recently war and famine and worse than war, these exactions from these crazy people, which is not uncommon in history, unfortunately. This barbarity is quite common. But it is very uncommon in the last 70 years in Europe, of course. So we have to learn from what they say, because at least we know what we don't want to experience again, so we can prepare. Otherwise, we will be extremely I think upset is upset the word. I think it's worse than upset when it is going to happen. We're going to be traumatized.
Yeah, as Santayana said, those who do not remember their history are condemned to repeat it.
Except I don't see anything of a farce this time. It's going to be tragic.
that was Marx, and yeah. Well, yeah. Kind of I don't know, sort of a grand guignol sort of farce, if anything.
No, unfortunately, these tragic elements are when there's death and suffering, it's never a farce. Although I must say that Marx had a good wit in that excellent. It's probably his best book, this one on the revolution in France.
The revolution.
Yes, it's probably his best book. Anyway,
it's certainly his funniest prose. Yeah.
John Michael Greer, thank you very much. We could talk for hours, but I know you're busy today, and you probably have a lovely day. You're in Pennsylvania, right?
No, actually, we're just south of Pennsylvania in Maryland.
On Maryland, so you're probably
the state of Maryland has this little tail that sticks out way west into the mountains. And that's where we are.
So you probably have great weather this time of the year.
Yeah, it's just now. It's sunny. It's not quite as hot and humid as it's been, and it looks like it's gonna be a lovely day. I hope to put some work into the garden and then do a bunch of writing.
Excellent, and for all our listeners, John Michael Greer, I really encourage to read all his books. Take it one by one. There's a lot of them, but amazing books, very insightful, as you could figure out listening to this podcast. After Progress, his latest books, Reason and Religion at the End of the Industrial Age, a really very, very good book, which I hope we will get in French in some time. I really hope that.
So do I.
John, thank you very much, and we'll speak another time.